The DPRK Foreign Ministry has stated the current crisis on the Korean Peninsula is the most dangerous since the Korean War in the early 1950s. The DPRK's official news agency quoted a Foreign Ministry spokesman as saying that U.S. aggression hysteria had never reached such a height, and the Korean Peninsula has never been closer to the brink of war as in the period during recent military drills. The spokesman also said the current tensions prove that the United States is a chieftain aggressor and harasser of peace with escalating tension. He added that the DPRK's option to bolster its powerful nuclear deterrence is for self-defense and that the decision is right and far-sighted. As tensions on the Korean Peninsula have risen, the United States and South Korea have been holding joint military exercises in the region since early March. The DPRK Foreign Ministry also suggested the country will continue to test nuclear weapons. It says that it will bolster its nuclear force to the maximum in a consecutive and successive way to defend against U.S. aggression and hysteria.
North Korea threatened to sink the USS Carl Vinson and a U.S. submarine. In the meantime, U.S. forces in the South Korean military are conducting joint military drills in the Korean Peninsula. RT Simone Del Rosario has just arrived in Seoul, South Korea, and joins us with the latest updates coming out of the region.
One of the biggest updates coming out of the Korean Peninsula today is this perceived threat made by North Korea's foreign ministry, indicating the supreme leader could order a nuclear test at any moment. A spokesman for the foreign ministry said this is in response to the U.S. wanting to kick up sanctions and pressure against North Korea, saying if the Trump administration's policy against Pyongyang is maximum pressure and engagement, which is what they're calling it, then Pyongyang is going to maximize and bolster its nuclear deterrence. Now, we're reporting to you today from Seoul, South Korea, which is about 35 miles south of the border. On the north side of that border, North Korea does have artillery that could hit us right here in the South Korean capital. This has been a potential threat for those living south of the border for decades. Remember, these two sides are still technically at war with each other. Back in 1953, all sides in the Korean War signed a ceasefire, but they never agreed to a peace treaty. So this hostility can deeply affect those living south of the border, including the 10 million people right here in Seoul, about 25 million people in the metropolitan area. Well, what we've been reporting is that the U.S. is setting up a missile defense system here in South Korea called THAAD. And there's been a big controversy as to which government will end up paying for it. It has a $1 billion price tag. Today, the South Korean Defense Ministry said this issue is not up for renegotiation. The U.S. will pay for the system, despite President Donald Trump's comments last week that he wanted Seoul to foot the bill. The U.S. and South Korea are under an agreement that South Korea will provide land while the U.S. will provide funding and maintenance for equipment like this. But this equipment, this missile defense system, it's controversial on its own, not only for North Korea, but China also does not like it being set up, saying it impacts its own military operations. And there are some South Koreans who are against it as well, thinking that it just makes them a target to North Korea, provoking the country to the north. Reporting from Seoul this week, we'll be getting a sense of how South Koreans feel about the tensions here in the region and potential military conflict. We'll speak to diplomats and power players about how the relationship between this embattled Korean peninsula and China and the U.S., how it's changing on a daily basis. And if things here weren't fluid enough already, in just 1 week, South Koreans are going to be going to the polls to elect a new president. So we'll take a look at how that future outcome will impact any kind of future military engagement with North Korea. It's a lot to digest. We'll be reporting for you all week from here. We'll leave it here for now. In Seoul, Simone Del Rosario, RT.
This is Xinhuiju, Dandong's neighboring city, a DPRK special administrative region with a population of about 360,000 and a major connecting point between China and the DPRK.
Xinhuiju is just dozens of meters away from me. It is the fourth largest city in the DPRK. It may appear idle in contrast to Dandong, especially to those who are just visiting here. But in the eyes of locals, changes are not too hard to see on the other side.
24-year-old Shi Dan, born and raised in Dandong, now operates a small Korean-style eatery. The restaurant is named after its location, the riverbank. having a grandmother who moved to Dandong from the DPRK decades ago to get married. She says the country over the river is not as different as you might think.
There have been changes in Siniju. They may not be obvious to you, but I went there when I was little and also more recently. Nowadays, you can see high-rise buildings and vehicles on the city streets, which didn't exist in the past.
And Shidan's mother, who has lived her whole life in the Chinese border town, explains what could be fueling those changes.
As much as we've been developing quickly, they've been changing too. The opposite side used to be more of an industrial area, but now they are trying to catch up, especially in terms of infrastructure to boost cross-border tourism and trade.
But what about people on the other side of the border?
They're not that mysterious. I thought they would be until I got in contact with some of them. Apart from the language, they're not that different from us.
And there's one change in particular that Shi wants to see.
My relatives on the other side cannot come over yet. If there is more development in the region, it may make it easier to cross the border. My grandmother would be very happy to see that, and so would I.
It may take some time to bridge that gap, even though only a river separates the two cities. Zhao Lingfeng, CGTN, Dandong, Liaoning Province.
The North Korean government for attempting to conduct yet another missile test. The Pentagon will be conducting another intercontinental missile test this week. In television appearances over the weekend, President Trump again refused to rule out preemptive military action against North Korea. This follows similar threatening statements made by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Pentagon officials, and notably Vice President Mike Pence, who rallied troops aboard the USS Ronald Reagan by promising American military action.
We will defeat any attack and meet any use of conventional or nuclear weapons with an overwhelming and effective American response.
For more, let's bring in Brian Becker with the Anti-War Answer Coalition. Brian, you heard what Pence just said there, an interview with Bloomberg today. In an interview with Bloomberg today, Trump actually said he'd be honored to speak with North Korean President Kim Jong-un if the conditions were right. Has diplomacy with North Korea worked in the past?
Indeed. The Clinton administration in 2000 took an initiative whereby Madeleine Albright, who was then Secretary of State, formerly the U.S. ambassador to the UN under Bill Clinton, she went to Pyongyang. She met with Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father. Talks were underway, and it appeared at that time that there would be not only a lessening of tensions, but perhaps the normalization of relations between the U.S. and North Korea. At last, an end to the Korean War and the replacement of the Armistice Agreement from 1953 with a peace treaty, which is what DPRK actually wants. But then Clinton left office before finishing that job. George W. Bush came into office and immediately declared that North Korea was part of the axis of evil along with Iran and Iraq and prepared to invade Iraq. And that's when North Korea said, guess what? We're suspending our non-nuclear plan, and we're going to build nuclear weapons, and we're going to do that right now. That's what got this ball rolling. So Trump could be going back, if he wants to what Bill Clinton seemed to be doing in the last year of his administration. Interesting
that timeline's often left out of any conversation about North Korea. But in the U.S., we constantly hear about North Korea's missile attempts, their development of weapons which could hit the United States. It would seem as if the U.S. has a lot of reason to fear the tiny country, but we don't hear really, why do they fear us?
Well, between 1950 and 1953, the United States carpet bombed North Korea. They bombed it back into the Stone Age. 4 to 5 million Koreans died, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. The main complaint of American pilots in December 1950, that was 2 years before the war ended, was that there was nothing left to bomb in North Korea because not one structure taller than one story was still standing by 1951, and yet they bombed for another 2 years. So when the U.S. government now simulates the aerial destruction of North Korea, as it does every year with war exercises, some of which are going on right now, that's not a war game for the North Koreans. That's not a game. That's not funny. They've been through there. They've had their country destroyed. And so they're demanding that the U.S. suspend the war games simulating the destruction of North Korea. And the North Koreans have said over and over again, if you do that, we will suspend missile tests and nuclear weapons tests, to which Obama said no and Trump a month ago said no. So yes, there's a basis to have a settlement for these issues.
The New York Times ran an article last week claiming, quote, a growing body of expert studies and classified intelligence reports conclude North Korea is capable of producing a nuclear bomb every 6 or 7 weeks. The piece also claims progress of DPRK's nuclear program is impossible to verify. Is any of this true?
Well, I think the United States was caught off guard because North Korea actually made very significant advances technologically, both with its rocketry and with its nuclear weapon technology, including possibly miniaturizing a nuclear weapon. The North Koreans have said from the beginning, we need this as a deterrent. They only spend $4 billion a year on military. The United States is going to increase its military budget by $54 billion just for the next year, bringing it to $670 billion. The U.S. has 7,000 nuclear weapons. The U.S. is the only country to have deployed and dropped nuclear weapons. So from North Korea, a country, again, which was destroyed by the United States 65 years ago, they say we're going to have nuclear weapons in order to defend ourselves. And they now believe that, having learned the lesson of Iraq and Libya, where both countries gave up their weapons of mass destruction and were then targeted for regime change, this is their final and fundamental defense. But that doesn't mean that this program can't be capped. If Trump is serious about meeting with Kim Jong-un and says, let's perhaps have a deal, cap the program. In other words, it won't be denuclearized. They're not going back to that. The North Koreans are not. But you could cap the program where it is now in exchange for a peace treaty. I think there'd be a lot of reciprocity from the point of view of the North Koreans.
The media constantly talks about North Korea using language like the regime, dictator. It also loves to highlight the suffering of the North Korean people. And while no one is denying that serious problems exist in the country, like any country, what you've just described is a country that has went from utter destruction just several decades ago at the hands of the United States and is now dealing with them on the international stage with nuclear weapons and an actual country, at least. I mean, they actually rebuilt. So why does North Korea look this way?
North Korea looks the way it looks in the media because of demonization and racism. I mean, it's a profound racist characterization of North Korea, a stereotyping of a country and of a people. I've been to North Korea 4 times. I was there in 2013. The first time I went in 1989. It's gone up and down in terms of economy. Right now, it's fairly robust. The country has a very high literacy rate. It's about 99%. It's an educated people. It's a strong people. It's a confident people. The children are walking down the street unaccompanied by adults. Huge advances socially. So by third world country standards, not a basket case at all. So the American image of North Korea is just such a caricature. We need Americans to go to North Korea for themselves, to see North Korea for themselves, because what they're getting from the media is a lot of demonization and stereotyping, which never conforms to reality.
Brian Becker with the Answer Coalition. We always appreciate you bringing some much needed context to all of these issues on the world stage, but especially here in North Korea, it's not going away anytime soon.
Thank you.
From North Korea continues to grow. President Trump is putting forward a new strategy, telling Bloomberg News that he would be honored to meet with Kim Jong-un under the right circumstances. While many analysts have criticized Mr. Trump's openness to meeting with North Korea's leader, then candidate Barack Obama received a far friendlier reception when asked about a similar idea during a debate in 2007.
Would you be willing to meet separately, without precondition, during the first year of your administration in Washington or anywhere else, with the leaders of Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea, in order to bridge the gap that divides our countries?
I would. And the reason is this, that the notion that somehow not talking to countries is punishment to them, which has been the guiding diplomatic principle of this administration, is ridiculous.
And listen to what President Trump said earlier today about the danger our troops face from North Korea.
How safe are our troops that are along the demilitarized zone and our ally in South Korea? How safe are they with some of the defense systems that we've provided? And what's the status of those?
Well, nobody's safe. I mean, who's safe? The guy's got nuclear weapons. I'd like to say they're very safe. We have 28,000 troops on the line, and they're right there. And so nobody's safe. We're probably not safe over here. If he gets the long-range missiles, we're not safe either.
And earlier we had General Jack Keane, who was commenting on whether he thinks President Trump would actually meet with Kim Jong-un.
I think that's always a possibility with this president, because he puts huge amount of bank in his skill sets and his ability to make a deal. Well, they have nuclear weapons to preserve the regime. They have accomplished that. What President Trump's trying to get him to stand down from is advancing the weaponization of ballistic missiles. That's what he's trying to get him to do, get him comfortable. Yeah. Look, we're not coming after you. You're going to stay in power there as long as your people are willing to keep you in power. And I don't know if that relaxes Kim or not, frankly.
All right, Greg. So a meeting with the president would be something that might lift him up, right, Kim, like maybe give him lots of attention, or it could also be a way to scare the Chinese into thinking they need to do more in order to help us so that we don't actually meet with him one-on-one. What do you think the strategy is here?
I don't think it's a new strategy for Donald Trump. He turns unpredictability into a pattern. So he starts with a compliment, you know, in this case, smart cookie, which you don't have to be smart to be a tyrant. As a dictator, you can just kill your enemies. It's smart dealing with adversaries in a republic. But then he will compliment you, then he will insult you, then he will compliment you. He did this from everybody from Ben Carson to Mitt Romney. He treats his opinions like phases of the moon because he's a salesman. He's a salesman. Everything is up for negotiation, including who you negotiate with. And people will trust you if they trust the negotiator. So you can say, well, you didn't like it when President Obama went on the apology tour, right? When he appeased around the world. Yeah. But it's because we didn't trust him as a negotiator. Whereas Trump could indulge the same ideas. But you go, I think he could probably wrap Kim around his finger if he wanted to. So you think that maybe by the end of a meeting with Kim, he'll be wearing a red hat and saying, lock her up.
That's right. That's possible. The other thing is, Kimberly, that's different from 2007 to now is that the situation is different and more dire, and that the weaponry is advanced. We're not, I guess we don't exactly know what the mental state is of Kim Jong-un, but possibly flattery in terms of saying that he'd be honored to meet with him might be a way to get him to come to the table?
Look, obviously he does things in an unconventional way that people aren't quite used to, and it's certainly not business as usual in D.C., the way that he handles things, whether it's negotiating business deals, trade, or other things. Obviously, this would be unprecedented, and you don't want to put certainly American president in a position that would be any kind of security threat or risk, especially like you said, we really don't know 100%, you know, everything about this guy in terms of who we're dealing with and his instability. Nevertheless, I think it's good to at least float it out there to show the world that you're willing to have talks and discuss this, that you're not just someone who's coming in and wants to drop bombs on people. You're somebody that actually is striving to achieve peace and stability in a geopolitical area that has been really troubled for a long time. And as it relates to President Obama at the time in making those statements, you're absolutely right. A lot has changed and really escalated in terms of the level of national security threat to the United States. And I think that President Obama would be the first person to say that, because that is one of the most important things that he stressed in his meetings with President Trump.
That media really did sort of just accept that President Obama, well, then a candidate, would be the hope and change that they were looking for, and that maybe that was why they didn't criticize him as much. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, not only did he say that he was going to meet with the Iranian leader without any preconditions, he shook, I think, Hugo Chavez's hand, and he was applauded for that. I think he went and watched a baseball game with Castro in Cuba. So, you know, I don't know if Trump's just getting caught up and, you know, he's president now and he thinks he can manhandle people, but I believe he's an America First president. Whereas Obama, people think he's going to cave to the adversary, and so people trust President Trump to negotiate more effectively. But like you said, there are risks. When you put an American president's prestige on the line and our credibility on the line, and then you get into a negotiating situation, and then it comes out with nothing, then you look bad, and it weakens us, and it also emboldens our adversaries. It, I think, bolsters his credibility, Kim's, at home and internationally. So there are a lot of risks, but this could be a Nixon goes to China situation. If anybody's going to do it, it's going to be President Trump.
Now, Bob, you have lots of different experience on the international stage from when you were at the White House. Was North Korea a factor back then In the 1800s.
No, I was 1823. Okay.
I know, no. In the 70s.
Great-great-grandfather.
Andrew Jackson was president.
Let me tell you what. The idea of he might as well be negotiating with Ronald McDonald in the those plastic things and go in there and say, this guy is a tyrant. He is a thug. The idea that the president of the United States would go and sit and talk to this dirty, ugly man, and who kills people left and right, has human rights abuses, kills people, puts them in gulags. I mean, what are we talking about? He's the president of the United States. I mean, I don't like Donald Trump, but I'd like him a lot less if he did something like that. The last thing I'd say is this also is rewarding, if this happens, it would be for other countries trying to develop nuclear weapons. Well, maybe we can get rewarded too.
I think that's already been happening, though, with Iran.
And we'll give you a lot of money.
Yeah.
And you'll cheat on us, and we'll be okay with it.
So you'd be okay with going over and giving this guy a stage?
Absolutely not. But you know what I think? What's interesting? There's a little bit of hypocrisy going on with the left. The left should love Trump because he's willing to sit down with anyone.
Right.
I think because he's a closet dove. I really do think Trump is a closet dove. He doesn't want to use force unless it's a sure win. He's definitely less of a hawk than Hillary would be.
And the truth is that, and I took this line from Weekly Standard earlier. I know you love it when I quote.
What about the Federalists? They're jealous.
I was at the Weekly Standard today, but they said there's a great line that preemption is easier than postemption.
I don't know what that means. It went way over my head. But to your
Why did
point,
you quote
Greg,
something we don't understand?
I know.
You don't understand that?
What did you? I don't get it. There's
preemption.
Yes.
Right, it's a play on words, Greg. It's a preemption would be to
It's a
try to
terrible
prevent
play.
him from getting the weapons, that rather than trying to deal with it afterwards when he has the weapons and possibly
But speaking to the hypocrisy, this is everything that the left wants.
Oh my God.
Multilateral engagement. This is denuclearization. You guys should be praising President Trump for sitting down and talking and using diplomacy. This is John Kerry in the White House, right?
You should do this rap of yours and look at me the whole time. No, we're not all for denuclearization. There are probably a lot of people, I'll tell you who is, some people that are in the white supremacist movement don't like nuclear.
How did we get into the white supremacist movement?
I'm going to set you guys up for this.
Where did you come up with
because,
that?
You know why? Because we're going to do another segment on a bunch of people running around looking like they're terrorists, and they're going to be called Democrats. So I think I'd just offset that early.
Well,
but listen, on China,
Isn't that every
one fast point on China. China
I don't know what that means.
they're trying to get China to play a major role in this. Can China do that? I'm not so sure. A, they can, but B, if they do, will they? And if you're China and you're trying to expand your geopolitical reach in the Pacific, and already they're talking to Singapore and Thailand and the Philippines, I think that they probably think it's a pretty good idea the United States stays focused on North Korea and the rest of these places they don't stay focused on.
But the other thing that in the media, we've always struggled with the things that Donald Trump says, and you end up finding yourself Trump-splaining or just trying to I don't get it. But he has this rare gift of saying certain things that he says, like, under the right circumstances, which essentially negates it's like it just makes it.
What would those circumstances be?
Hanging upside down, by
but don't they spend years thinking about where to put the water and who talks first and who shakes their hand first? These things take years. They'll never get to
a great book on that, and we'll give Kimberly the last word, was Marlon Fitzwater, who wrote Call the Briefing, and it was about all the summits between Reagan and Gorbachev, and they did spend a lot of time thinking about where they would sit and all that.
All
Can you
about
quote something from it?
Protocol. One thing's for sure, Kim Jong-un is not leaving there, so President Trump would have to go.
We want our president over there. There's a safe, but Secret Service.
But that's what I was
that
saying.
one.
They're not going to put an American president in a security risk situation like that, so I don't think this is going to happen at all. They can FaceTime each other.
Everybody wants to
technology.
change the bad boy. It's like, you want to, it's like Sharon Osbourne, meeting Ozzy. That's what they're trying to do. You may not be the person that can change the little guy.
This is true.